Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Also from my side, my name is Ralf Diemer. I'm the Managing Director of the eFuel Alliance, and I am happy to be your moderator for today. A very warm welcome, especially to all our speakers which we have in our call today. We will come to that in detail a little bit later, but first of all, I would like to hand over for some greeting remarks, welcome remarks to our new eFuel Alliance chair of the board, Monika Griefer. She was elected on Friday. She was a founding member of Greenpeace, actually. She served there also as first woman in the international board. She was Minister of Environment in Lower Saxony from 1990 to 1998. After that, she served in the German parliament for quite a long time. And her last function was the Director of Environment and Society at AIDA Cruises. So welcome, Monika, and your welcome remarks, please.
Thank you, Ralf, and welcome you all together at our timely event on the Fit for 55 package presented by the European Commission on last Wednesday. We called this event Unfit 55. Why did we do this? Because we believe that especially in terms of setting up the framework to ramp up the global industry production of e-fuels, the proposals are not sufficient yet. And they are not sufficient to get the CO2 out of the atmosphere. And for that, we need the e-fuels. The proposals breathe a declared will of the Commission to actually regulate as much as possible. This technology should be pushed in which sector and which energy carrier should be used in which sector. With this approach, it will be very difficult to enter into a hydrogen-based CO2 neutral economy in the time frame we need to. And we have to be quick. We see it with a flood now. It's not the future, it's the present we have to act. Investments need to be pushed right now as effective as possible. All available technologies need to focus much more on cost efficiency so that we can really multiply and scale up all technologies, and that we can also use all the equipment we have already. These are this 1.4 billion cars, the 90,000 ships and the 20,000 airplanes, which are already there. We have to still use them, and for that we need e-fuels. That's why we wanted to discuss today with politicians and experts, and we thank all of them that we are here and that you are here and that you are participating and willing to discuss it with us. And I hand over to the member of the Commission who really makes an input for us to explain what he thinks, and we can discuss it. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much, Monika. Indeed, we have a member of the cabinet of President Timmermans with us today. It's Daniel Mees. Welcome to our event today. Daniel is working in the cabinet of Mr. Timmermans since 1st of December 2019. He is responsible for transport and digital aspects in particular. And of course, this includes the European Green Deal. By training and by profession, he's a lawyer. He started his career at the European Commission in its competition department. There he worked on transport and digital technology files, so quite a long-standing experience, especially on transport and digital issues. During the last Commission term, he managed relations with the European Parliament and the Council and was a speechwriter to Commissioner Margrethe Vestager. Welcome to you, Daniel, again, and we are looking forward to your introduction of the Fit for 55 package.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Alvin. Good to see you again, and the people here. I hope you can all hear me very well. That's always like the first question you ask in a Zoom seminar. No, I'm really honored to be here. My first gig after the presentation of the big package, indeed, on Wednesday, and in that sense also a good place to be, because as I will explain, the e-fuels and the electrofuels industry is really quite essential for big parts of our agenda, and also large swathes of decarbonizing transport, which is my portfolio in the Green Deal cabinet. Energy and transport are really central to the package we've presented on 14th of July, and that is also justified, obviously, because we need the energy transition to kick off as soon as we can if we want to make our Green Deal vision a reality and our package a reality, but also because transport is such an important part of the package. I say no surprises if I repeat again that transport is the only sector, the only activity, really the only one where emissions have been steadily on the rise. So there are really big citizen expectations for us to tackle that. When I started working in the European Green Deal, I was also one of these people that, optimistic but also realistic in the sense like, yeah, I start believing things when I start seeing them. And really seriously, what we have been seeing in the transport and the mobility sector already in the last years is just unbelievable. Unbelievable if you compare it to a few years ago. We have seen steps taken by the industry themselves, which I think we would have deemed impossible just a few years ago. And that, of course, applies across the different transport modes because your industry is important for across different transport modes. If you start with the road transport and the cars, we've seen announcements from big parts of the car making industry themselves, which again, I say were unbelievable if you would have seen them a few years ago, where you clearly see big parts of the market heading in a direction, which is electric mobility. And you also have, of course, like the hydrogen car also still there as an option. But when you look at electric mobility, it's really extraordinary what you see from the industry themselves. The announcements when big car makers want their new car sales to be electric fully. Opel at 2028, Volvo at 2030, General Motors and Ford at 2030, Volkswagen at 2035. Now, these announcements, if you would have said a few years ago that will happen, I think that everybody would scratch their head. It's like, well, I see it when I believe it, and now we're actually seeing it happening. But another very important moment for me in the European Green Deal was in February 2021, where there was the first plane taking off using drop-in synthetic kerosene. And that also a few years ago we would have qualified as science fiction, but it took off and it flew that flight. And I say it with a healthy degree of Dutch pride because it was a Dutch flight, it was a KLM flight that used this drop-in fuel. And that is very, very important to see happening this year. And that really puts your industry, the e-fuel industry, at the heart of things. Now, I know, and I want to make a few points of context before going indeed into the details of the package, because this is a package that requires a lot of discussion. And we've seen that. My boss calls it the end of the beginning, the start of the beginning, the proposal that comes out and now goes to European Parliament and Council, and also discussions within our member states. And we know that the European Green Deal is a formidable challenge. We know that. And we also know that in order for it to be a success, people need to feel the comfort that they can come along with it. And that's for the citizens that use ultimately all the transport and energy solutions that we will talk about, but also for industry themselves. We do need the industry in Europe to help us trigger the innovations to actually bring the affordable clean options to the citizens. So with that package, and I will come to it in detail, as I said, again, three political things are important, and they are really equally important. First, of course, the aspect of climate action and equality. The European leaders, so really at the highest level, our leaders from our member states decided that by 2030, our greenhouse gas emissions must go down by 55%. And that commitment at the very highest level in Europe was cemented in the European climate law, which has turned that obligation to reach minus 55% by 2030 into a binding obligation. And that, of course, also really has an impact on the transport sector, which I said already is the only sector where emissions have been on the rise and where action is really urgently needed. Now, of course, you see that each transport mode is in a different stage of development, and the market in each transport mode is in a different stage of development. In road transport, this is really the decade where we need to start getting things right. If we see that, cars are on average on the roads 10 to 15 years, according to the most optimistic predictions, and you know that you have to reach zero emission in 2050, you can almost calculate backwards by which date the new car sales, and I repeat that, the new car sales, because you indeed have also the cars that will stay on the roads for quite some time, even after that. you can calculate backwards by which date these cars need to be zero emission. And of course, that was a political choice that we made to make a Commission proposal that date for us is at 2035. It's a question who you orient yourself towards. You orient yourselves either to the front runners, all of them that I mentioned, and that has been our choice, to orient ourselves to the front runners and to choose 2035. But that will now go to Parliament and Council, and let's see what the debate brings us. When you talk about a transport mode like aviation and maritime, it's of course different, because for these transport modes, what you need to do is to make sure that they get on a medium to longer term path towards decarbonization, because technology-wise, it is a far bigger challenge in these transport modes. And for that also, like, the e-fuels will be super important, and I will get to that because you will see that reflected in parts of our package. I appreciate that the speaker before me said I still believe that the package is unfit, and of course we can have that discussion, but we did do really quite a lot already to make sure that our package reflects that. So the climate action, air quality dimension is very important here, obviously, if you work on the Green Deal. The second element, which is equally important, is the jobs and the industrial leadership. We also want our industry, our European industry, to lead into the future, and really in the technologies that lead into the future. So we carefully looked at where the market is, where the market is heading, where the industry is heading, and took that as a given also, like, for our proposals going forward. But we do know, when our impact assessments tell us, and we've done impact assessments for each of our proposals, the car proposal shows you can create 300,000 jobs in areas like electrification, charging infrastructure, software, connected cars. We have separate job impact assessments for our aviation and maritime proposals, for which the e-fuels is a very promising avenue also for job creation. But you also have to be fair, and you have to be honest, because overall the impact may be positive, but there will be parts where the impact will be felt in a very, very different way. The component supply chain for automotive, but also many other parts of the industry. And for that, you absolutely need a transition plan. And you will see throughout our proposals, both for the cars and for the other transport modes, we've added quite some novel elements, obligations for us in the European Commission to keep on monitoring the developments, also in the development of technologies, and to make sure that this industry, whenever something else is still needed, something other and additional, to make this transition happen, that the Commission will then act. And that is pretty new, because this jobs and industrial side is very important to it. You know, you can't do a climate agenda on the basis of targets alone. You need to work on a plan to actually get there and to bring everybody there. The third proposition, which is also really important, is our citizens. And we do all, not only me in the Commission or the MEPs in the European Parliament or representatives of our government in the Council, but also industry, we do have a broader responsibility to make sure that whatever we do with our proposals, that we also make a thing like transport affordable for citizens, and that we keep on focusing on the affordable options. That's why it's so important that our CO2 standards have banked on these announcements of the car industry, big parts of the car industry themselves, because the more zero emission cars you get to market, the more models will be there, and the more affordable they become. Now, our impact assessment shows, when you look at e-fuels in particular for road transport, that up until very late in this decade, or like even thereafter, they will be 43% more expensive than driving an electric car. Driving electric cars nowadays, for many people, already cheaper on a total cost of ownership basis due to the fuel savings than doing something else. But the impact assessment has shown that it's 43% of a price difference for new cars, and even your existing car running it on e-fuels will be 10% more expensive for quite some time to come. And that has been a very important driver of some of the choices that we've made. You have seen in our CO2 standards that we are very committed to checking the technological developments and seeing what will happen. But that sort of like is a big explanation of the proposal that we come out, because we do have this responsibility to actually make this mobility affordable. And again, there it's already different in maritime and aviation. Now, I'm wholly convinced, and of course in the European Green Deal, we do want to give a particular role to a mode like rail transport, but we won't be able to move around ourselves or have our goods moved around without ships and planes. And the best customer proposition that we can give for maritime and aviation is actually make sure that we offer a consumer proposition that the maritime and aviation is clean, so runs on clean fuels. And the e-fuel industry will absolutely be key there. If you look at synthetic fuels, they are a very promising way to decarbonize these type of transport modes, and we need to give it our best to make sure, together with industry, that we make that happen. So our agenda is not only about these targets, also in our fuel proposals for these modes, it's also about things like creating a low carbon fuel alliance, we call it, but the e-fuel alliance is almost, you know, the future game for this type of alliance. We do indeed need to ramp up the production of these fuels as quickly as possible so that this clean aviation doesn't only become a thing of a test flight, but really becomes a reality that allows people still to move around in the way that they will want to. Still, we know that this challenge is formidable. Again, especially our proposed fuels policy, I think there's a lot already in there for e-fuels. So for the people listening into this call, we have under our revised Renewables Energy Directive, which you all know very well, and perhaps even better than me, by 2030, a target that transport fuels must reduce their greenhouse gas intensity by 13%. We've set immediately, and that was also a deliberate choice, we've immediately set parallel incentives. So from now onwards already into the next decade to ramp up the e-fuels for the future. So we're aiming for, our proposal was 2.6% by 2030, and we have separate triggers and targets for e-fuels in maritime and aviation already starting this decade and going into the next ones, because we do need to build these supply chains almost from scratch. And we do really need the e-fuels to help us decarbonize transport modes like that. Still, we know the challenge is formidable. We know absolutely we need that plan. I've already said that there's commitment to the industrial transition and the jobs transition in all of our proposals. Another very important part, essential part, is Commissioner Vallion's proposal for the regulation for alternative fuels infrastructure. Now, I know that everybody, of course, focuses a lot on the targets that are in there for the electric charging points. You know that for each zero emission car in each member state on the road are coming to market, there needs to be 1 kilowatt in charge capacity and each 60 kilometers enough charging capacity as well. Of course, these are like targets that you know people focus on, but an equally important target for me is the target that we have for the hydrogen refueling infrastructure. Each 150 kilometers in both directions on the key highways by 2030, we would like to see enough hydrogen refueling capacity as well, and hydrogen refueling capacity both for trucks and for cars. So to leave also that opening for those car makers that also want to focus on the hydrogen cars, that the infrastructure that we put in place for the trucks can also be used by the cars. And going into the further future, the avert, we now call it, the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, has commitments and obligations, binding ones for the member states to come up with national development plans for the future fuels and technologies in maritime and aviation. So that's a space that really is quite important for your alliance too. We chose a regulation because we thought it was the only political responsible choice to make as a proposal, because like that, once it comes out of trilogues in Parliament and Council, you have targets that do apply immediately. Of course, they apply against a certain year, 2025, 2030, but the member states can, like that, plan immediately and can immediately start proposing their plans to the Commission. The Commission can have a look and see where the ambition levels still need to change. And only the regulation proposal could have brought that. So that was a deliberate choice that we made to make sure that whatever we do in other areas, fuel maritime is a regulation, aviation fuels a regulation, the CO2 standards are, that we also have that regulation in place to bring us the infrastructure that we absolutely need. But we realized that we need to go even further than that, that not even that is the complete answer. We need an industrial agenda to make our industry a winning one, as I said. We need that social agenda, because we can't rely on a magic wand that a job that may be tied to may move to another technology. You can't rely on the magic wand. You need a smooth transition plan, building our skills and reskilling and programs like that to make sure that people can move seamlessly from one job to the other, which will be a formidable challenge. And we will work together with that from our cabinet, with the cabinets and the commissioners Breton, Schmidt, many others. So we need that social agenda. And of course, we also need that customer proposition, as I said. We need to make sure that whatever we do, that these mobility options stay affordable. We will be technology neutral. That is a word that I will hear again, in this discussion. most of our regulations actually set targets, and it's for the industry to have the technology in place to reach those targets. So that is, like, in our view, the technology neutrality that we strive for. But we cannot be result neutral. We cannot be result neutral in terms of our climate targets. We cannot be result neutral in reverse engineering, where certain of the markets are already heading. And we can't be results neutral in terms of, like, the affordable mobility across the different transport modes. So that was a bit the dilemma that we were in when making our proposals. And again, it's the start of the beginning, the end of the beginning. You can choose your word which you think is best. This proposal of this package is not the end. We will continue discussing these proposals into the coming years. And hopefully then in a few years' time, we will see the climate package ultimately emerge. It is a very, very big political puzzle to solve. And we do also need to carefully listen to people like you in the E-Fuels Alliance to help us solve that puzzle. My EVP Frans Timmermans has already said that it's equally important to be ambitious, but also just. And by weaving all these industrial pathway and jobs aspects into our proposals, we hope to give a first start in making sure that without it, the just transition is there, because without it, there won't just be a transition. My EVP Frans Timmermans won't leave any stone unturned to help in this transition. So I'm really looking forward to, thank you again for the invitation to be here. As already said, a very, very important industry. And I very, very much look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daniel, for this comprehensive overview. Of course, when you see the whole package with all the proposals you made, you could have talked, I think, 1.5 hours more if we would go into the details. But actually, that is not what we want to do today. So thank you very much for this overview. We have 266 listener or participants now. I just want to say that please, everybody, if you have questions, some questions are coming already in, use the chat function and we try to forward them all to our participants in the discussion. We have some questions on cars, Daniel, which is maybe not surprising. But if I may, I would like to start with one more general question, because that is something which strikes us or striked us quite a bit when we looked into the proposal for the first time. You see there that you had a huge discussion in the European Commission about e-fuels in general. That's no doubt. And it's no doubt that e-fuels of any kind are important to achieve climate goals. And we see that you also see that. The very problem we have in the moment is that e-fuels are not there. We need to ramp up an industrial production. And we need to see that on a global scale. Now, when I see your proposals, then I see the real that you really tried to focus a little bit on which energy carrier should be used for which use case or for which transport mode or for which technology. I assume this comes from the thinking that e-fuels in general are not there yet. They have to be produced. The question now is, how can we ramp up industrial, and I think we need to see that on a global scale. How can we ramp up industrial production of e-fuels if we try to limit the use of e-fuels in the very beginning by our regulations? Shouldn't we do it the other way around and set just targets, for example, on the Renewable Energy Directive and leave it to the market actually where these kind of fuels are used? Because now, for example, you exclude basically road transport by far from the use of e-fuels.
Yeah, thank you. And indeed, in the Commission, I think and people have reported on that. So I'm also not saying nothing surprising, but in the Commission, I think it's really fair to say that the big part of the debate was exactly on this dilemma that I just scheduled. That, like, you want to have your ambitious climate targets, but you also want to make sure that everything is affordable for everyone, and that the package that you propose does not only climate justice but also social justice, in a sense that you make sure that whatever you propose as a policy, make sure that you have the maximum chance that you focus on the affordable options. That has been the main debate. So the new the new emissions trading proposal for transport fuels for road transport and the heating fuels in our buildings triggered quite some discussion in that sense. And really, the discussion on e-fuels and where the market is going already and the prospects of that is not very far from that. If you see that indeed this is an industry that needs to ramp up, that means that it will be still very expensive in the coming time, and that meant that we made the CO2 standards proposals for cars as we did them, because I don't think politically we just didn't make the choice to immediately focus on the most expensive option in there, but we take decarbonization of fuels everywhere very, very seriously, and our fuels policy in the other proposals, the Renewable Energy Directive and all these other proposals, is really focused on like the serious challenge of decarbonizing the fuels in our transport system. We could already assess at the time that we made a proposal, we could already assess, like, no matter how you turn it, they will be needed in aviation and maritime, because technology-wise, that is the only way that you can, by including them in the equation, to make sure that actually that clean aviation and clean maritime transport becomes a reality, just given the technology developments and where the market is heading, and even the own climate roadmaps of the aviation industry gives a big role towards the clean fuels. And there, the impact assessments show, for instance, for the fuel aviation initiative, that if you focus on the fuels like already now to make sure that they're ramped up as quickly as possible to also reach these transport modes, that then you're talking about like a possible increase in the ticket price of 8%, which in terms of affordable mobility options is still, our assessment was like overseeable in that sense. So that is sort of like the trigger to the choices that we've made, because we're not, as politicians, the job is not only to make sure you reach your climate targets, but also to make sure that you do your utmost to make sure that you focus on these things that also help with the affordability.
There is a perfect question fitting to this cost issue. I just read it what the guy, I think it's a guy, it's anonymous, so I cannot say if it's a guy or a woman, but the question is the following. Concerning the fleet regulation, the eFuel Alliance talks about a voluntary option. That is one of our proposals, actually, that all RED II regulated additional fuels should be encountered into the fleet regulation for cars and vans. The question now is, why should we talk about the costs in advance if this option, e-fuels, is too expensive for car manufacturers and their customers? They will not choose it. If they do, good for the technology that can be ramped up without the huge subsidies planned for aviation and steel production. Don't you agree?
But again, like, you must also take account of where the market is already heading. And I just outlined the announcements that many of the car makers have already made. So the market in the industry is already moving there. So, we can't be results neutral in terms of, on top of everything else, also reverse engineering the choices that we are seeing that players are making in the market. But again, I emphasize that we are aware that the proposal that it carries also a huge responsibility to help in the transition, also in the relevant supply chains. We take that responsibility very seriously. And after summer, we will already look very seriously at a transition pathway, because we do need to do this with responsibility. We do need to do this responsibility that ultimately what we're doing is to also help people again, move from one job to the other. There will be growth areas in the economy under these proposals, but they will not match one-on-one some of the areas where the impact is felt, and that responsibility issue is huge and is really felt across the Commission.
Yeah, maybe another question on the car issue. I mean, let me do a personal remark first, because as you know, I was working for the car industry before, and I had the pleasure to follow all the CO2 regulations before as well. It's quite an interesting remark all of you guys from the Commission do now, because you always say that the car manufacturers are announcing all electric in certain dates. I mean, first of all, I would say that's not that's only a strategic decision by manufacturers in the second place. In the first place, it's regulatory driven, because due to the CO2 regulation, they don't have another choice than to electrify their fleets. So it's quite I would say funny that you force manufacturers to a certain strategy, then the manufacturers announce this as a strategy, and then you take that as a reasoning for even tighten the targets more in the same way. I find that interesting. In formal times, I would say this very close connection between manufacturers and politics would be criticized heavily, especially by NGOs. It looks like in this time it's very different. But let me add to that just one question, because that's from Mr. Schüle from Conti, actually. He says, you were saying that you're surprised that the OEM statements are strongly focused towards BEV. Mr. Schüle says, now for me, it is not surprising, as BEV have a cost advantage of at least 10,000 euro due to the CO2 regulation for cars and vans. And they have this due to the fines manufacturers have to pay if they don't fulfill the goals. And that's independent of its real CO2 advantage. What do you say to that?
Yeah, well, like, thanks a lot, first of all, of noticing that we do indeed talk to the car industry. I think that's also sensible policy making, because, you know, you have to talk to the people that are affected by a regulation before, but like that would not be entirely a fair representation of what's going on here, because the people that have called for the strict CO2 standards are certainly not only certain of the car makers. The consumer organization, BEUC, and you know that too, they also asked for that, and they, for the same reasons I already outlined, because of the affordable mobility, they saw the same challenge when it comes to the e-fuel. So the consumers, our representatives, when we buy a car, were on that side too. And I'm not even talking about the environmental NGOs, which I'm seeing even more often than representatives of the industry. So this is something that is felt a bit broader in society than just the car makers that are making announcements. And again, our fuels policy, and with all the proposals that I've outlined, has quite some ambitions in there for the use of e-fuels. We've carefully impact assessed that also against our ambitions under the hydrogen strategy, because that was a question that came up earlier on, and that impact assessment shows that the proposals that we're making are aligned with what we want for the hydrogen strategy and the hydrogen use and the hydrogen economy overall. But again, now the proposals are out, the impact assessments are out, and I'm sure that we will have a discussion still on this, and that's only natural.
All right. If I may, one last question. I know you need to run. You told us you have 30 minutes. So in 3 minutes, we are out of this 30 minutes. So the last question would be again to the car regulation, but also compared to what you proposed on ships, for example. It's from Niels Dressel from Mahle. You keep emphasizing the regulation, the car regulation, CO2 regulation is technology neutral, yet due to the CO2 emission standards being measured at the tailpipe, ICE running on CO2 neutral fuels will be excluded. Would it not be more appropriate to switch cars to a well-to-wheel regulation, as also proposed by the Commission for shipping?
Yeah, like, well, I don't know, like that's really sort of like how you see it. I do see it as technology neutral. If you say we have a target, we need to meet that target to reach our ultimate climate targets, which are a binding obligation upon everybody in Europe. And then we need to see the technologies making that target. I also don't think that when we look at the digital transition that we're approaching that in the sense of like, I will move my target in order to make sure. I don't think that that is the way that we approach the digital transition, and also not the way indeed that we've at least approached the CO2 standards as part of the package. But it's not the only part of the package. Tailpipe, focusing on tailpipe does give a very clear signal, planning certainty for the car making industry, because they have that target then to work towards. And we've built in a CO2 standards regulation that is quite generous in terms of planning certainty for the relevant car makers. We didn't change any target before the 2030 target, so the next decade can be used to plan accordingly. And then you have the 5-year, still the 5-year interval, so that the planning certainty can then still happen. So if the question is, should technology neutrality mean results neutrality? Yeah, then my answer would be no. But there was also this challenge of like the affordability of everything. So apart from like double regulation under the standard and under the Renewables Energy Directive, I never think that is wise. Like double regulating and complicating, because this signal was quite important. But again, this affordability thing should not be just left hanging in the air. That is really the reality of what the Green Deal needs to achieve. The fact that we are in this transition, which is formidable, as already said, but also make sure that citizens actually can have the mobility options at the attractive prices. And in aviation and maritime, indeed, because it's a bit medium to longer term, what you need to achieve there, we do want to take that also very, very seriously. And I don't think that our proposal for the alliance in that sense will or should disappoint. But for an alliance you build up with somebody, obviously, and that is with everybody on the call. And there's no doubt in my mind that for big parts of this, the electrofuels will be very important.
Yeah. Okay. So clearly, I think about technology neutrality. We did an event already. I think there is quite a different interpretation going on between you and us right now concerning the CO2 regulation for cars and vans. But I think we need to elaborate here further. I mean, first of all, Daniel, I would like to thank you very much for your participation. I think it will take at least 1.5 to 2 years until everything is decided by Council and Parliament. So there will be lots of more opportunities to discuss that. And as you pointed out, as always in Brussels, the Commission proposals are the starting point for the debate now to come. And I can promise you at least that we will participate in that debate, and then we will see how we all together will end up with these Fit for 55 package. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you can enjoy some holidays soon. And for that, I wish you all the best and hope to see you soon.
And I wish you a very good event with these very important people for our future.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That brings us right away to the European Parliament. The European Parliament, of course, one of the 2 major European decision makers, you could say. I very much welcome Jens Geier in our event now. Jens Geier is member of the European Parliament since 2009. He is a member of the Industry, Research and Energy Committee, called ITRE in parliamentary jargon, and a substitute member also of the Budget Committee. He is the rapporteur of the European Parliament on the EU hydrogen strategy, which is, of course, also for us a very important tool. And he has negotiated the EP position on the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism, which will be maybe not a major issue for our today's event, but for sure will be a very important issue on the whole debates coming up. Since the beginning of 2007, Jens Geier is the head of the SPD, the Social Democratic delegation. So that's basically the German SPD MEPs in the European Parliament. And in this capacity, he is also a permanent guest on the SPD's board and presidium. By profession, he's an historian and also proud to represent his home region, the Ruhr area, which is actually also quite a bit affected by the floods right now, as we saw in the news. So let's hope everything will be going better there soon. Very welcome, Jens Geier. And my first more broader question to you would be also after what you heard from Daniel Mays right now, what would be your, or what is your first general assessment of the Fit for 55 package?
Yeah. Good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the opportunity to discuss that. Yeah, you rightly and also Daniel rightly said this is the starting point of the negotiation, and I have to admit I'm not envy. I'm not very. I would not like to be in the Commission shoes here right now, because they put the proposals on the table and are now get criticism from all the different sides. I think it is a good baseline for starting the negotiations, because what we have in mind is nothing less than a turning point for the societies, nothing less than a turning point also for industry, because we end the carbon era and we're beginning the era of sustainability and digitalization, and the job to handle this huge machine in a way that we do not get the big picture totally damaged is something that is not an easy task for Commission. So they have my sympathy on that. It is a huge package, 13 regulation altogether. For this afternoon, not every of them is relevant. Also for my committee, not everything in that is of the same relevance. But the two things that I would like to draw the attention on is ETS and the RED, the Renewable Energy Directive. With the ETS, we have an interesting situation when we look at that in connection with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, because it seems to be clear that we can have only one of them in order to have a protection for industry according to the rules of the WTO. I'm absolutely sure that when you take use enough money and pay a huge law firm, you will get intellectually excellent paper that it could be both, but unfortunately it is on the assessment, on the legal assessment of the Commission, that we can only have one of them, and the final wording, of course, will be done by the WTO. So ETS is in connection with CBAM is critical for the future and will be taken a lot of time, I guess. Now it is the plan of the Commission to have an ETS also for heating and the transport sector. That is probably the most critical part. Because it has to be an own ETS system, because nobody wants to have the certificates for industry again minimalized by because the heating and transport is taking from the same pool. So we are looking at them how to set that up in order and do that rightly, so we take the lesson learned from the ETS especially. One of also the points we have been in steady discussions with Frans Timmermans and his cabinet on is, and that is probably not surprising for Social Democrats, that we are concerned about the social issues coming from that. And we learned that there is a proposal for a new social scheme, for a social fund that is driven by money coming out of the new ETS system. And as you rightly mentioned, Ralph, I'm also a budget guy, and I know that there is to this moment no mechanism in the EU budget that gives money directly to individual persons. So it can be on the rural funds, because when the farmer is the only owner of his enterprise, then he gets the money from the chamber directly, but we don't have up to now a mechanism that gives the money back to the individuals directly, and I don't see Frans Timmermans knocking on the door and handing on checks. So that won't work, and we have to think about how can that be done. And I'm very critical about leaving it to the member states, because they will use it for their own budget needs and not necessarily giving it back to the people. So that it might become up as a as a really huge problem only when it comes to the social impacts of the new ETS system. The second thing I would like to mention is renewable energy. We need an awful lot of new renewable energy, and I saw that when I was the rapporteur for the hydrogen strategy, that we really have to be very ambitious on the RED 3 in order to have enough renewable energy to fulfill all the goals that we have in front of us. So I'm very much in favor of binding targets here. There's potential in every country, even in the countries which have government that are very reluctant on renewable energy up to now, and I'm very much in favor of very ambitious targets here, because when it comes to hydrogen, the sooner we build up the renewable energy, the sooner we will have a ramp up of hydrogen industry run with the green hydrogen. That is, of course, what we want to see at the end. Since the offshore potential is huge, but also limited, we need some more onshore. And I have to say, when I look at my government here in Germany, I'm very disappointed of what I see. I mean, there is the ministry president of North Rhine-Westphalia running for chancellorship in September. And he has now, in fact, reduced the area where windmills can be installed in North Rhine-Westphalia from an even more. I heard the figure of from 4 down to 0 point something. And of course, that is not the way it can be done. We need onshore and offshore potential for renewable energy in order to have enough green energy for industrial use and transport where it is necessary, and heating where it's possible. That brings me to some other point, what is necessary to mention here, but not part of the Fit for 55 package. These are the international aspects, because I'm urging Commission and member states here to start negotiations for something that I would like to call an international renewable energy alliance, in order to have countries around Europe in our neighborhood. And I'm especially thinking of the countries on the south coast of Mediterranean Sea, to really build up a partnership. And when I say partnership, I mean partnership on that neo-colonialism, in order to help them develop their own renewable energy industry and produce what is needed in Europe. And the last point I want to manage is the aspect of conversion. I mean, I started with saying that what we're going to see is a change of era, and that means we have a lot of conversion in industry, of course, and that needs a lot of money. So with the Next Generation EU, the European Union has fired a bazooka with money, and this money aims in that it should be used in fulfilling the political objectives of the European Union, and greening it can be one of them. So the money that is needed should be used, in my opinion, from Next Generation EU in the first place, but that will not be enough. When we look at the regions that are in the situation to change the industrial base, then we need additional instruments. So you mentioned that I'm coming from the Ruhr. That is the Ruhr RUHR. There's another Ruhr that is even more flooded now, that is going into the Maas River and is now causing a lot of troubles to our Dutch neighbors. That is RUR, Ruhr, but it's same pronunciation in Germany. The old industrial heart is the RUHR area, and I see here what has been achieved in industrial change in the last 30 years, but we don't have that time anymore to go on. So North Rhine-Westphalia is not a country of car producers. We have Ford in Cologne and Mercedes in Düsseldorf, but we have a lot of automotive industry in providing. And what now has to be done by governments is for planning for the next 15 years and look which regions in their country are is endangered or in trouble by this situation, and start to build up instruments for conversation. NGEU could be one, the regional fund could be another, but that might not be enough. So S&D, my political group, is in favor of maintaining the instruments for the budget that we have used. Now for NGEU again to raise that money, and we have to definitely to work on the state aid rules in order to make the member states able to support industry with the money needed for this conversation. And as a trade unionist, I have to say, at the end, reskilling, retraining of the workforce is an even decisive sector here. What we want to achieve is the conversation, the transformation of industry without social frictions. We have seen in France the protest of the Yellow Vest. That is a menitekel. That is how it should not be done.
Yeah, thank you very much for these remarks, Jens Geier. I think especially on your last one, everybody here would agree. Please allow me 2 follow-up questions. And again, if somebody in the audience wants to place a question here, just let us know via chat. We will try to put that forward as soon as possible. Let me have 2 short follow-up questions and then bring in our colleagues from the industry also to give their comments. Of course, the whole package has to be seen systematically and has to be seen together somehow. I will place an example just to show what I mean. The CO2 regulation for cars, and it's again cars because there it is very obvious, but you could, of course, I'm very sure you could also find other areas where you could discuss this in the same way. The CO2 regulation for cars, despite what Mr. Timmermans and Mrs. von der Leyen are saying, is excluding the combustion engine. Why? Because a combustion engine run by e-fuels is not incalculated in this regulation because it's not a zero-emission car by tailpipe. It is a zero-emission car if you take a well-to-wheel approach, but it is not by tailpipe, and this regulation is absolutely tailpipe-driven. That is why you force the automotive industry, and a lot of suppliers are also in our membership, to change to electrification, and that means to diminish or even close up value chains in Europe, transfer them partly to other parts of the world, because it's very likely that the combustion engine will be running longer there. And that, of course, causes social distractions. When you now put the emission trading system on transport, like the Commission proposes, in addition to that, then first of all, for electric cars, you don't need an emission trading system because electric energy is already in the emission trading system included. And secondly, all people who run a combustion engine have higher prices for fuel because that's the only alternative which will lead to this emission trading system. And then in the third part, you have the avert, in which you need to provide the necessary infrastructure for the electric cars If this is not working out, for example, because the member state want to have mandatory rules here, which we know happened last time when they discussed the avert, then the whole electrification strategy will fail. And at the end of the day, I'm very sure that no fund will help you to solve these distractions or fractions you are achieving with this regulation. What would your answer to that? I mean, you understand what I want to say. I mean, it's really about the regulatory proposals in the first place. You could avoid a lot of problems, also social problems, if you make the regulation right. Even if that would mean, for example, that you need to stick to the combustion engine to a certain extent. It's not that we would fight electric cars, but in general, you need all technologies. And that is what we are aiming for and where we see the problem in the package right now. I think you need to unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, what you have described is one possible scenario. Yes, of course. It is the job of the parliament and of the member states to avoid a scenario like that. And we are starting the discussions right now. That the stop on the combustion engine is one of the questions that is highly contested in the European Parliament, of course. And it will also be contested by the member states. So the interesting question is, how do we keep all the targets that we have here together in a very widespread discussion between the Parliament's committees here and also in the member states. And the interesting thing will be, how do we keep the results together so at the end is a pragmatic, realistic and a social, not disruptive approach to the Fit for 55 package. So if it comes out the way you described that, Ralf, yes, there are a lot of risks. And what we start after the August, when we start in September working on that issue again, is to have a closer look on all the assessment that has been done by the Commission up to now, and to check out whether there are better alternatives than we have found in the proposals of the Commission. And I'm afraid that is the best answer I can give you right now.
Thank you very much. A last question, and then we hand over to our colleagues, because that, I think, is of interest for most of our listeners as well. I mean, if you see these 13 packages now, and there is 13 regulations now, and there are many others already to come and already on the table, how you do that in the European Parliament in terms of organizing your work, yeah. Because they are discussed in different committees, and of course there are very many different interests. And maybe a last word also on the time frame you predict in this whole package, because I think that's absolutely unprecedented that we have this high amount of different regulations on the table for once.
Yeah, that are two really huge problems in policy making. So the time frame, the last ETS reform took us 3 years. That would be much too long. That should be a package that should apply results in 2030. That is 9 years from now. And when we take 3 years in negotiating, then the time is almost consumed. The half of the time is consumed. So we can't do that. We have to be faster than that. But unfortunately, as you rightly said, there will be a dispersed discussion. A lot of the dossiers will be in the ENVI and in the Environment Committee, with depending on the political issue, with the opinions from my committee, so that is industry, from the Transport Committee, from the Employment Committee, maybe even from the Economy Committee when it comes to taxation of energy, what is also an important aspect on the question, what does the whole thing cost at the end for the consumers and also for industry. And we have to organize something in political groups, but also in the parliament, something like a horizontal approach for that, because a situation should be avoided that, let's say, one committee comes to position A, and another committee comes to position B, and A and B is not in coherence to each other. That should be avoided, because then things go down to the plenary, and then it normally is not becoming more easy. It is becoming more complicated, especially when you have the problem of shifting majorities on this, on that. So this is really also a challenge for the internal organization of Parliament. How do we get things done so that we have at the end a coherent result? And that is, I think, the answer to organization and time frame. Let's be faster than 3 years. But I hear from the council that they also expect very complicated negotiations. I don't know yet, although that should be said when we have a German government again after the election on the 26th of September, who can really make a say in Brussels. Because when the German ambassadors, although only sitting there saying, I don't have a word from Berlin, I don't know what to say, that won't help. That is just a hint for the Germans among us. The others have, but France is going into the same situation very soon. Right. So maybe that also the side of the that also the council have to take its time. Finally, last sentence. I hear from a lot of member states that they will ask for money in order to get the transformation done, and that they want to avoid the situation that they have to pay out of their own budgets. So that will come on top. We don't have time, but we have very challenging problems.
Right. That would be very interesting to see. Thank you very much so far. Jens Geier agreed to stay on for a while, so he can listen to our next speakers, and maybe we can place also some of the questions later on to him. So I move quickly now to Christian Schulze. Welcome on our panel. He's the Deputy General Manager and Director Research and Operations at Mazda Motor Europe, one of our car manufacturers members in the e-Fuel Alliance. He studied air and spacecraft engineering at the University of Stuttgart. He's working for Mazda actually for more than 30 years. Right after his degree, he started as a research engineer in Mazda European R&D Center. And since then, he works there. And he was involved in many different research projects at Mazda, including the development of Mazda's first European electric vehicle prototype in 1994. A remarkable date, I would say, or the UNOR Hydrogen Mobility Project in Norway in 2008. Since 2014, Christian holds his position, as I said, as Deputy General Manager. Welcome to our panel, Christian Schulze. And my first question to you is, what is Mazda's approach towards climate neutrality, and how do you consider the approach how do you consider the Commission proposal Fit for 55? Sorry for that. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Diemer. I'm very pleased and happy to be here among all these very interesting people. And Mazda really welcomes the Fit for 55 proposal and its ambition to consistently reduce emissions across sectors, to boost sustainable growth and achieve both the 2030 target and later on the climate neutrality objective. Mazda is also supporting the target of achieving climate neutrality by 2050 in line with the ambitions of both the EU and of course our home country, Japan. But we really believe that achieving a carbon neutral mobility is a highly complex task. We are convinced that reaching this target is only possible by implementing, as we call it, a multi-solution approach. This must include the introduction of electric and electrified vehicles, that is common knowledge, but also the use of alternative renewable fuels such as e-fuels and green hydrogen for advanced internal combustion engines. Electrification is a key pillar in Mazda's multi-solution strategy, and by 2030, all Mazda vehicles will be equipped with some form of electrification. We therefore welcome the European Commission's commitment to ramp up charging and refueling infrastructure across all member states. However, we must consider cars are a long-life, high-value good. And I think it's not realistic to believe that until 2050, the whole vehicle car park in Europe will be converted to full electric driving vehicles across all member states. With this situation, we risk not achieving climate neutrality by 2050, especially if we focus our attention on singular technological solution of vehicle electrification using electric and fuel cell cars. Together with our partners in the e-fuel alliance, we therefore promote the use of renewable fuels, including in the passenger car transport. To achieve a level playing field of all solutions, these fuels should be accounted towards manufacturers' CO2 fleet target achievements in the CO2 emission standards for cars and vans. Only if policymakers will be setting the right incentives, it will be possible to promote a society that is entirely based on renewable resources, employing green electricity and hydrogen, as well as e-fuels, biofuels, recycled fuels from multiple origins, and subsequently avoid that further CO2 emissions are being released in the atmosphere. Staying true to the target of climate neutrality, letting innovation flourish and act on a level playing field will empower multiple solutions and ensure a successful achievement of our joint target. On top of introducing new vehicles with CO2 neutral propulsion, it will allow the decarbonization of existing car fleets as an additional process accelerator. Recent studies show that both the speed and scope of introduction of electric vehicles and the deployment of charging infrastructure is directly linked to the GDP of EU member states. A multi-solution approach bears the opportunity for countries with so far lower achievement to contribute to the EU goals with socially compatible progress and not limiting the mobility needs nor affordability for their citizens. The European Commission published its Fit for 55 package just on the 14th of July. So we need some more time to carefully analyze this huge amount of data. But in general, there seems to be a tendency to focus on simply raising the levels of ambition rather than providing the basis for a coordinated, technology neutral, and innovation promoting alignment through regulation. What we can say is that the 2030 and 2035 CO2 reduction target levels proposed by the European Commission will be very challenging to reach if we limit ourselves to electrification. The Commission emphasizes in its communication that they are committed to a technology neutral approach, as we heard it from Mr. Mays. But whilst the proposed CO2 tailpipe emission target for 2035 of 100% is not a legal ban of the internal combustion engine, it in fact allows only electric vehicles with no tailpipe emissions to be used in future. So here, a wording which says CO2 neutral would be more fair to a variety of technologies. Combustion engine technology would be otherwise excluded per se, even if used in a climate neutral way based on the economies created by the impact of penalties. We believe this falls short of a comprehensive emission analysis. Also, we should not forget the impact on both customers and OEMs will start way before 2035. Customers will hesitate to make investments in clean combustion engine technology already from 2030 or even earlier, which will reduce the value of existing customer vehicles already on the road, and it will stop research and innovation into clean fuels or engine technologies. looking at renewable fuels in the longer term, quotas will not create a marketplace for renewable fuels if there is not sufficient demand. Such a demand could be achieved by implementing a voluntary crediting mechanism for renewable fuels, anchored in the CO2 standards for cars and vans. In the proposed regulation, the deployment of alternative fuels to reduce CO2 emissions is insufficiently effective, as it only promotes the volume, but does not acknowledge the CO2 reduction achievement to their own ends. Only when renewable fuels are widely deployed across all sectors and are accounted to contribute to the fleet target achievement of car manufacturers, we can expect a sufficient variety of technical solutions for achieving climate neutrality. Even nature tells us that singular solutions are too prone to risks, and nature promotes a variety of competing solutions that lead to a society of successful winners. The size of the problem requires an adequate set of solution approaches from different angles to create a healthy competition in achievement speed, economic, social, and usability terms. In the course of the coming discussions with Commission, Parliament, and Council members, we will pledge for this, and we hope for a result-focused, technology-open discussion and subsequent legal text.
Thank you very much, Christian Schulze. I would suggest I bring in now the other panelists, and we then can put some questions forward all together. I think that's the best approach for our time frame we have. Our next panelist is Jakob Lagercrantz. He is the CEO of 2030 Secretariat from Sweden. Jakob is actually since Friday also a member of the eFuel Alliance board. So congratulations to that from my side. He's also one of the early members of Greenpeace. He served as an executive assistant of the chairman of the board of Greenpeace International from 1992 to 94. He worked as a consultant quite long time, but always related to environmental issues. And since 2013, he is in his current position. So Jakob, all what you heard so far from the Commission, from the Parliament, also from our colleague Christian Schulze due to the CO2 regulation, also from your Swedish perspective, where you have higher advanced climate goals already with until 2030 compared to other member states. The Commission is, or member states have agreed to reduce CO2 emissions to from 55% by 2030. That's why the package is named Fit for 55. So do you think we will actually achieve that with the proposals by the European Commission?
Well, I think it's achievable because there are so many low-hanging fruits to pick from the building industry, from renovating houses. And so I think actually that will not be so difficult. What I feel is a bit of an insult is a 13% GHG reduction in transport. I mean, in Sweden, we took a parliamentary decision to have a 70% reduction of CO2 by 2030, because that is what the Paris Agreement needs, not 13, 70%. And I feel that worries me that the Commission is just, they are so heavy on CO2 reduction after 2030 that they forget about all the existing solutions today. In Sweden, we have the 70% target, CO2 reduction target by 2030. Already, we have reduced by 21% in the past 10 years. We need to do more, but we've already done the 21, the first heavy ones, thanks to electrification, biofuels, modern fuels, etc., etc. So the big challenge, I think, is that the Commission is not tough enough, and the Commission is not looking at all fuels in an equal way, actually focusing on GHG reduction using electrification, biofuels, RFNBOs, e-fuels, everything that we have at our disposal today.
Could you elaborate a little bit how Sweden actually is doing that? Because I mean, the Commission approach right now is much more on electrification,
Yeah.
which could be a way to lead there. But is it really possible by all electric, or what really do we need, and how are you? What is your perspective, and how to get all these fuels we need in addition?
Yeah, the 2030 secretariat is totally agnostic when it comes to solutions. We just want quick GHG reductions from behavior change, from vehicle technologies, and we don't want to ban any technologies just because they're called something. We want to see effective technologies on the market. And we are looking at all fuels where we like fuels that have a high GHG reduction. We do not like electricity produced in Poland because it hasn't got enough GHG reduction. It's not efficient enough, but we like it in other countries where we have good green electric production. What's happening in Sweden is that we are leading among the member states in Europe. I mean, we have about the highest level of chargeable cars, but 48% of newly sold cars a couple of months ago. Great, we need that. But that's just the new cars coming onto the market. We have about 5 million cars driving on the roads of Sweden. So what do we do about all the other cars? It's a mathematical challenge. It takes time for all the electric vehicles to take over. And in some areas, they will not take over. Heavy transport, biodiesel is fantastic. That's a great solution. So as long as it's sustainable, of course. So what we see in Sweden is focusing on both electrification and sustainable biofuels, and actually working more and more on behavior, maybe the most difficult part to focus on.
Thank you very much so far. Let me bring in our third, so last but not least, I must say, speaker. It's Elko Decker. He is the Chief Representative Europe of the Methanol Institute. He comes mainly from the biofuel side, you could say. So he, from 2007 to 2014, he was Chief Marketing Officer of BioMCN, the largest producer of second-generation biofuels. Before that, he was chairman of Biofuel Go, a pan-European initiative aimed to implement the certification system for sustainable biofuels. Elko studied management of change at the Erasmus University of Rotterdam. He's from the Netherlands, actually, as you can see there. For the starting point, maybe you could elaborate a little bit on the Methanol Institute, because I'm not sure you are a member of the E-Fuel Alliance, but I'm not sure that everybody in the audience knows about the Institute. And then, of course, your first take on the Fit for 55 package so far.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you very much for the opportunity to introduce MI briefly. And in the interest of time, I'll do it as quickly as possible. So the Methanol Institute is a global industry association. We represent the world's largest methanol producers, distributors, technology providers. And over the last few years, growingly also a larger number of customers have joined the Institute. Probably the most noticeable name that has recently joined is the large container shipping company Maersk. Maersk is one of the companies that announced that they see methanol as a short-term solution to reducing the carbon emissions from their operations. And for those of you that don't methanol, or for those of you that have skipped chemistry at school, methanol is a very versatile chemical, but it's also a future-proof fuel. It can be made from a broad range of different feedstocks. It can be made, for example, from biomethane. It can be made from municipal solid waste. It can be made from forestry residues, like Jacob knows some of the projects in Sweden, I'm sure. And in the context of the E-Fuel Alliance, methanol can also be made from renewable electricity. And those processes typically provide you with fuels that have close to or over 90% CO2 savings. And what's interesting about methanol as a product, it has the highest hydrogen to carbon ratio of all liquid fuels, which means for us laymen that it burns very cleanly. So it actually doesn't only provide you with very low carbon emissions, it also reduces local emissions. And this is one of the many reasons why we see an increased uptake of methanol as an alternative fuel in shipping, but also increasingly for road fuels. Now, going to your question around Fit for 55 and especially in our industry, the Renewable Energy Directive, I have to admit, I haven't read everything yet. I mean, it's a lot to go through, 13 revisions. I applaud the Commission for being ambitious. I think it is a step in the right direction to show leadership, to show that we are serious about meeting the obligations that we agreed upon to reduce carbon emissions, to try and get us close to the Paris Agreement commitments that we set out. But at the same time, and I think I can see that the same attitude coming from some of the previous speakers, I have some concerns as well. Maybe my primary concern was the fact that we started adding more changes to the already complicated piece of legislation. And the reason why I'm concerned about that is because already with the experience we have with the legislation in place now, we are seeing lack of coherence. And lack of coherence between the different directions, because it often isn't a holistic approach. We've ended up with directives and regulations that have cut up the entire value chain in all small pieces. And what looks like a great solution in one bit could turn out to be a problem in another one. And what we need is a holistic approach across these different pieces of legislation to make sure that the net result is actually what we're set out to do, which is reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. Now, being the last speaker, I run the risk of probably repeating a lot what was said before. We've heard the tank to wheel, well to wheel discussion a few times before. In my own words, the big problem I have with a tank to wheel approach is that we run the risk of carbon leakage across industry segments. So, okay, we have zero emissions at the tailpipe, but if you haven't actually secured that the electricity supply to the car is carbon neutral as well, then the net result could be that we've not actually delivered anything on the overall objective of reducing the CO2 emissions in transport, except it's not qualified as CO2 in transport because it's now qualified as CO2 from electricity production. The thing that I think also lacks a little bit is sense of urgency. If we talk about stopping the sales of combustion engines by 2035, we're completely ignoring the fact that we are building up a carbon debt from 2021 up to 2035 for all the cars that are being sold and will be sold in the coming years. And that will be on the road for many years after 2035 as well. And for that, we need low carbon fuels. We need solutions that deliver carbon savings right now. And there, e-fuels and biofuels have a very important role to play. My last point, I can probably give you a whole list of things I have to address, and I'm sure I will on the consultations that will follow. But one thing that I want to highlight, and I'd like to urge the Commission to think about as well, is also coherence and consistency across the implementation in different member states. It's one thing for Brussels to come up with a regulation, but what we've seen over the last few years and what we are seeing still today is that the way that these directives are being interpreted on a member state level are very different, which means that one solution will be admitted in one country, but it won't be in another one. And I'll give you one very recent example from my own country, the Netherlands, where we are talking about using e-fuels. But currently, the Dutch government is considering a legislation where they say we will only allow the use of e-fuels when and if they have been produced in the Netherlands, which for me, besides the fact that I think it's an infringement of EU free trade law, is actually not helping us get to the objectives. So I urgently urge the Commission to come up with solutions that move us forward and that look at the entire value chain.
Yeah, Elko, thank you very much. I think that is a very interesting information. Actually, the last one I didn't know that, but good to know. And I'm very sure. I mean, we had the same discussions in Germany as well when it was about the national implementation of the RED. So there is a long way to go also to put that through all the member states. and bring them on the same page here. We have the same issue when it comes to charging infrastructure for electric cars as well. There are very different approaches among the member states. We have one question which I would like to turn to Jakob, because I think it's again very interesting from the Swedish perspective. I just read the question and then I put another question from my side on the same issue. From a French point of view, after 9 months of Yellow Jackets movement, that was already mentioned also by Jens Geier, not so long ago, which start mainly because of the decision to increase cost of fuels, can give us an idea of the near future if EU do not take into account the impact of not balanced decisions. Turn only the regulations based on tailpipe CO2 emissions calculations with the explosion of cost for ICE car will drive my country in the hands of the extreme right or left, and then it will be too late. So that's less of a question, but the very question, I mean, Sweden has a CO2 tax or CO2 pricing system already in place, which was also take as an example when we had the German discussion about that. So how you need to do that and avoiding in the same time the social frictions, which are of course lay in the fact that you make fossil fuels or fossil energy in general more expensive.
Yeah, this is interesting because vehicles are becoming more and more efficient, and that started with the very important CO2 requirements of vehicles from 2013 onwards, which was very good. It's actually not more expensive to drive a car in Sweden today than it was 10 years ago. It's slightly cheaper actually because they are more efficient. And this means that you don't really see an increased cost for driving vehicles. Also, cars are very expensive to buy. So if we can develop shared vehicles and other alternatives to traveling, then the cost for the private citizen will go down. We have not seen the yellow vest in Sweden. We have had a very strong environmental development with increased fossil fuel prices and a tax exemption on renewable fuels. So for somebody, let's say somebody living in the countryside in a small village, if they want to really contribute to the environment, they could swap to driving on E85, maybe pay the 500 euros to convert the car, and there will be a subsidy from the government to convert vehicles in Sweden, and they could start driving on ethanol if it's produced in Sweden, less than or more than 90% GHG reduction without any higher cost for driving it. So I think we should be very open to this discussion, have a dialogue with society, but we should not take for granted that it costs more if you go, for instance, on renewable fuels, biofuels. Or e-fuels, it doesn't have to cost more than actually driving a car today. So we should not be blinded and just be so scared of the yellow vest that we don't try to look for the opportunities we have available on our doorstep today. Everybody doesn't need to buy an electric car. It could actually be a car converted or driving on biofuels.
Thank you very much. There is a question to Mr. Schulze from Tom Weingärtner. He's a very well-known journalist. Would it make e-mobility more expensive if e-fuels would be treated more favorably?
No, I think this is absolutely not the case. I think what we are really looking at is, of course, that, if, for example, the use of e-fuels is a complementary additional instrument towards the electrification in two directions. At first, it's the only technology which can decarbonize our existing traffic, as already pointed out before. And on the other hand, it also works hand in hand with existing technologies and future technologies. Think about discussions about plug-in hybrid vehicles, and think you fuel your plug-in hybrid vehicle with electricity and drive in the city with renewable electricity, and outside of the city you switch to CO2 neutral e-fuels. So it is a complementary activity which opens up also for the future further development direction. That means
We are now talking mainly about e-fuels that can substitute conventional fossil fuels so that transport becomes CO2 neutral. But on the longer run, we can also think about e-fuels with very specific performances that then will be used also in specific engines. So I think we should not rule out the innovation around e-fuels and combustion engines. We should have a focus on really CO2 neutrality rather than tailpipe CO2 neutrality, which is giving us no benefits.
Thank you very much. Maybe a question, a little different question to Elko, because I know that Methanol Institute is also working or is looking into these policies from a global perspective as well. And if you take this, if you put these global shoes on for a moment, I mean, the EU Commission and all decision makers in the EU are perceiving their own approach as a front runner in the world. The question I would like to ask you, are we really this front runner? Are we perceived as front runner leading the world? Are we even seen as a role model when it comes to climate policy? Or couldn't there be not also a danger that we are perceived as kind of climate nationalists when you see, for example, the carbon border adjustment debate we just have, who are starting to close their market to certain products and technologies? What is your take on that?
It's a very good question. It's not an easy one to answer. I do think most countries in the world do see Europe as leading the debate. But at the same time, a lot of the questions we get around the European policy, frankly speaking, are less concerned about what other countries can learn about what we do in Europe. Most of the questions we get is more about, okay, explain to me what the legislation is and how can I sell my product in Europe. So in that sense, it is in a good way, it's resulting in great examples of potential international cooperation, especially e-fuels. I think we need the international cooperation, because if we look where most of the sun and wind is available to convert into renewable electricity and then to convert that electricity into hydrogen or e-fuels, we need to cooperate with other parts of the world to bring them to Europe. When it comes to your question, is it seen as leadership or more of an EU nationalistic approach? Again, it depends a little bit who you ask. There are definitely industries that will consider this approach as a way of protecting European industry. But we need that discussion. We need that discussion on a global scale to start moving the needle forward, because if we try and always keep the momentum with the last country that moves forward, we will never get to where we need to be by 2050. But at the same time, I do think the European Commission and we as Europeans also need to make sure that we don't run too far ahead of our allies, because we do run the risk that we will lose part of our allies in this discussion, and people simply don't want to work with us. And in that result, that could result in actually carbon leakage in other parts of the world. I think there's some unfortunate examples where Europe has moved the sustainability debate in the right direction on some of the feedstocks that we've been using for fuels, for example. But we've only addressed the problem by saying, okay, well, this is what we don't want. We should ban these fuels. We don't want that type of feedstock in our country. But the people that own the feedstock then simply look at their vested interest and say, okay, well, if Europe doesn't want it, we'll just sell it somewhere else. And actually, if we can sell it there, we'll probably still grow it, which means that we actually haven't taken our full responsibility. We haven't involved the people that are a part of the problem, and we've only moved the problem somewhere else. And in that sense, I think if Europe really wants to show leadership, again, I've used the word before, we need to take a holistic approach. Don't be part of the problem, but continue to be part of the discussion and continue to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Thank you very much. We have one last question, and I would suggest I place this question as final question to all the three of you, with please with the bag of a short answer. The question is from Jörn Döring. I just read it. The EU can set the goal of becoming climate neutral, but the past must be left to the national economies. Do we now have a planned economy or a market economy in Europe? Or you could broaden the question a little bit. Are we entering in a planned economy or a market economy? And of course, it would be interesting to know what your preference would be. I don't know, Jakob, you want to start maybe?
Oh, this is a difficult question. Well, even Adam Smith, the founder of the liberalism, he said you need the invisible hand. You need an invisible hand to govern what industry and countries are doing. And I think we need a combination of the two, because the greenhouse effect is something we haven't been able through the market economy to deal with. So we need a combination. But what we also need is flexibility, where the Commission allows existing industries to develop, strive, and actually move to the next technology and then next technology. And they won't do that with decisions from the Commission banning existing technologies just because they're called crop-based or because they're called combustion. We need to look at the end result that we need, and that is GHG reduction. And sure, we might need an invisible hand up there somewhere.
Thank you. Christian Schulze?
Yeah, allow me an answer as an engineer.
Sure.
What we really need is a level playing field of solutions. And what we need is targets that are not only on the first look technology neutral, but which really are technology neutral, even under thorough examination. And by this, we will give multiple approaches a chance, and to have the best solutions find their way to the end. We have promising things already here, others must be developed. And I'm pretty sure with the right regulatory start, we can achieve that.
Thank you. And Elko Decker, please.
I can only support what the two previous speakers said. If anything, I don't think I'm a huge fan of planned economy, probably because my background in free trade. I think the only thing I would want to add to this discussion, again, going back to what I've learned over 15 years in the renewable fuels and biofuels industry, is if we want this to become a free market, we need to enable free trade between the countries. And that's why I made the point about the need for consistent policy across the different member states. If a company in Sweden has a great solution, and I have a client in the Netherlands that wants to claim those carbon savings, I'd want to be able to trade those carbon savings instead of drawing a line on the map and saying, well, no, it needs to be specifically in this geographical area. A carbon and CO2 and greenhouse gas problems are a global problem. So if we really want to move the needle, we need to think of systems that allow free trade across member states and across the world in general. And we need to think about systems that enable that free trade rather than trying to keep it within fictitious boundaries and worry about how we report it. We need to really get to solutions really quickly. And I would rather create a system that generates that interest from voluntary demand from consumers than having to insist on all sorts of regulations and restrictions. I would like to see a voluntary switch from fossil energy to renewable energy.
Very good.
I think on that note, we have to end actually the debate because our time frame is over already. From my side, first of all, thank you very much to all of you who spoke and gave input today, also to our politicians which were with us today. I'm very sure that we will have much more debates coming up on several issues of this whole package in the next 2 years. And with that note, I would like to hand over to Algara Castle, who actually organized this event. She's working in our team. basically on Brussels issues, on European affairs. And I want to thank you, Algara, very much for your work the last 3 weeks. Again, especially so shortly after the package was presented. It was not easy to bring everything together, but you managed. Thank you very much for that. And she will give us some closing remarks and will close the event as well. From my side, thank you again and hope to see you soon, of course. Algara, please.
Thank you, Ralf. And I would like to thank in particular all our speakers and all of our participants for making this such a, from my point of view, and I'm being completely honest, stimulating and informative session. I think it was a great opportunity to take stock and hear views of industry, of policymakers from the European Parliament. Thank you, Jens, for joining us from Italy. And directly from the cabinet of Frans Timmermans, the driving force of this giant climate policy package. I think during the last 90 minutes, it has become clear that everyone has the same objective, a true climate protection policy. Our members support the European Green Deal and its goal of consistently reducing emissions in all sectors, achieving both the 2030 target and the goal of climate neutrality by 2050. But there are also different ideas about to reach this crucial goal. It was obvious that when it comes to the CO2 performance standards, there are diverging opinions. Jacob criticized that 13% emission reduction targets in the Renewable Energy Directive are not enough, and we need far more ambitious targets. He suggests at least 17%. Elko from the National Institute made a very good point. The most important thing is to ensure coherence and consistency, not only across all the proposals, but also across the member states. And Christian from Mazda Europe reminded us to stay realistic and not forget about the millions of cars with an internal combustion engine, which will be still running in 2050. I think we should use these diverging opinions as a reminder of what is positive about the FF55, but also gain a clearer and sharper idea on where the challenges remain. And keep in mind what it is about: reducing greenhouse gas emissions and accelerate the decarbonization of our economy and transport in particular. And what was also obvious among our members is that a technology neutral approach will be crucial if we want to achieve this. We need to start the transition from fossil fuels to renewable fuels right now, because as Monica said right in the beginning, it's in the present we have to act. We don't have time, but we have very challenging problems, just to quote Jens. So e-fuel should be enabled now to start replacing fossil fuels. Daniel Maes from the European Commission said, the package is the start of the beginning or the other way around or something similar. But maybe we can agree that now should be the beginning of the end of fossil fuels and the start of the future for e-fuels. I hope our discussion today can spur us on where to return in September by focusing our minds on what we need to do to help the industry realize its potential and make the e-fuel alliance fit for the beginning for the big challenge ahead. I wish all of you hopefully relaxing summer break and hope to see you, the participant, the audience, back in September.